The US naval blockade of Iran is now in its second day. However, it's already failing. A Chinese tanker sailed right through the strait this morning. The US did nothing. Iran is openly mocking Washington. And behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia is panicking. They are privately begging the US to end the blockade, not because they love Iran, because they are terrified of what comes next. Hungary's new leader is taking his country back to Europe. Trump is attacking the Pope, and oil prices are swinging wildly. Here's what you need to know. The first topic: the Chinese tanker broke the blockade. US did nothing. A Chinese oil tanker named the Rich Starry successfully passed through the Strait of Hormuz this morning. This ship is already on US sanctions list for helping Iran evade oil restrictions, and yet it sailed right through. Here's what happened. The tanker initially approached the strait when the blockade began on Monday. It turned back, but then it broadcast a simple message. Its crew and owner are Chinese. Then it tried again. This time it went through. Two other vessels joined it. The US Navy didn't stop them. China called the blockade dangerous and irresponsible. They said the world must not be allowed to revert to the law of the jungle. Here's the bottom line. The US will stop Iranian ships, but they will not stop Chinese ships. The blockade is selective and Iran knows it. Now, Saudi Arabia is begging the US to stop, and here's why. Let me tell you about something you will not hear on mainstream news. Saudi Arabia is privately panicking. According to the Wall Street Journal, citing Arab officials, Saudi Arabia is pressing the United States to lift the blockade and return to negotiations. They are not doing this because they like Iran, they are doing this because they are afraid. Here's the situation. Since Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, Saudi Arabia has been using a workaround. They have a pipeline that carries oil across the desert to the Red Sea. From there, they export about 7 million barrels a day, almost back to pre war levels. But here's the problem. The Red Sea is controlled by the Bab el Mandeb Strait. That narrow waterway is just 18 miles wide, and one side of it is controlled by the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are allies of Iran. Saudi officials have told Washington that they have received assurances from the Houthis that they will not attack Saudi ships, but they also warned that the situation is very unstable. If Iran pushes hard enough, the Houthis could close the strait at any moment. And if that happens, Saudi Arabia has no way to export its oil. The pipeline becomes useless. The oil is trapped in the Red Sea. One analyst put it perfectly. He said, "If you restrict our oil exports, we can disrupt yours." That is the message Saudi Arabia is sending to Washington. But here's what makes this even more interesting. The Houthis might not even need to fire a single missile. They could simply start charging transit fees for ships passing through Bab el Mandeb. That would be a quiet, profitable way for Iran to escalate without starting a full war. Iran has already warned about this publicly. A senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader said on social media that Tehran looks at Bab el Mandeb just as it looks at Hormuz. He said that if the White House repeats its stupid mistakes, it will quickly realize that global energy and trade can be disrupted with a single signal. So here's the irony. The US started this war to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but by blockading Iran, they are risking the closure of a second strait. And if both are closed, Saudi Arabia is finished. The global oil supply is cut in half, and prices will go through the roof. That's why Saudi Arabia is begging Washington to stop, because they are trying to save themselves. Now, the blockade confusion continues. Meanwhile, no one still knows what the blockade actually means. The US military says the blockade only applies to ships going to or from Iranian ports. Ships passing through to other countries, like Saudi Arabia or the UAE, are supposed to be allowed. But President Trump says something different. He says the blockade is all or nothing. So ship owners, traders, and captains have no idea what the rules are. Most are simply waiting, they are not moving. Before the war, about 120 ships passed through the strait every day. Now only a handful are moving. The global oil supply is effectively frozen. And here's the real damage: Saudi Arabia's oil exports to China are expected to be cut in half next month, from 40 million barrels to just 20 million. That is a massive reduction. And China will have to find oil somewhere else, probably from Russia, at higher prices. The next topic. New talks are being discussed. Ceasefire deadline looms. Despite all of this, both sides are still talking, sort of. US and Iranian officials are discussing details for a second in person meeting before the ceasefire expires next week. Turkey is working to bridge the gaps. Pakistan is also trying to bring both sides back to the table. A senior Pakistani official says they reached out to Iran and received a positive response on a second round of talks. The potential window for these talks is this Friday through Sunday. Oil prices reacted immediately to this news. Brent crude fell to about 96 or $97 a barrel, a drop of about 3%. But don't be fooled. The underlying supply problem is still there. Analysts say prices could spike again at any moment. The US has about 15 naval ships in the region right now, including an aircraft carrier and 11 destroyers. There is a serious military presence, but experts warn that an extended blockade could strain US Navy capabilities elsewhere in the world. Now let's move on to the next topic. Trump attacks the Pope and it is backfiring. President Trump spent the weekend attacking the Pope. He called him weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. He suggested the Pope only got the job because he's American. The Pope responded from his plane on the way to Africa. He said, and I quote, "I have no fear of the Trump administration." He refused to debate the president directly, but said he will continue speaking out against war. Here's what matters: conservative Catholic leaders in the United States are turning against Trump. One prominent bishop called Trump's comments completely inappropriate and disrespectful. Another said Trump's attacks are a sign of weakness, that he attacks the Pope because he cannot silence him. The Italian Prime Minister called Trump's words unacceptable. Even Iran's parliamentary speaker praised the Pope for his fearless stand. Trump also posted and then deleted an AI generated image of himself as Jesus Christ. Critics called it total, absolute blasphemy. Polls show that Pope Leo is more popular than Trump among American Catholics, and with midterm elections coming, this could hurt Republicans in key swing states. Now, Hungary's new leader wants a reset. Hungary's new prime minister held his first press conference today, and he made one thing very clear: he wants to bring Hungary back to Europe. He called the previous government a Russian puppet. He said Hungary had become isolated and broken, and he promised to rebuild relations with the European Union. The EU has been holding back over $20 billion in funding for Hungary because of corruption and rule of law concerns under the previous leader. That money is now expected to be released. The new prime minister also said he wants Hungary to eventually join the Eurozone. That is a huge shift. For Ukraine, this is excellent news. Hungary had been blocking EU aid. That blockade is now over. For Trump and Putin, this is a defeat. They both lost a key ally in Europe. Okay, let me now sum up where we stand on April 14th. China broke the blockade today. A tanker sailed through. The US did nothing about it. Saudi Arabia is privately begging the US to stop the blockade. They are terrified that Iran will close the Red Sea Strait. If that happens, Saudi oil exports are finished. New talks are being discussed. The ceasefire deadline is next week. Oil prices are swinging wildly. Trump is attacking the Pope, and conservative Catholics are pushing back. Hungary has a new leader who wants to rejoin Europe. Ukraine aid is unblocked. The US blockade is already showing its limits. The question now is, what comes next? That's all for today's video. See you in the next one.